Hi, I'm Tom Woods, and you're listening to the Libertarian Christian Podcast.
Welcome to the show that gets Christians thinking about faith and politics. Get ready to challenge the status quo, expand your imagination, and tackle controversy head on. Let's stand together at the intersection of faith and freedom. It's time for the Libertarian Christian Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute. I am your host, Doug Stewart, and recently I was privileged to join Dick Clark on the Bob Murphy Show. And it was such a great conversation with Bob and Dick about the book Faith Seeking Freedom. And Bob asked some really tough questions, sometimes out of a little bit of like, hey, I just got to do due diligence and ask the tough questions. But it really opened up a lot of conversation. Top of mind in my memory is that we talked about, doesn't God own everything? And what is the Christian libertarian's view on, self-ownership? So anyway, I wanted to share that episode with you, so I hope you enjoy.
Well, Doug and Dick, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show.
Hey, Dick. Hey, Bob. Thanks
well,
for
you can
having
say
us
hi
on.
to him, too.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Dick. I already said hi to him.
Of course, I like to say hello.
Hello, gents.
So what we're going to be talking about, folks, for those who are watching the YouTube version, is this book, Faith Seeking Freedom, and that the Libertarian Christian Institute has put out. So before we dive into the content, why don't I give you guys an opportunity to maybe explain briefly who you each are, and then what the Libertarian Christian Institute is, and then the genesis of this book project, and then there are other authors listed on this just besides you two. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll just start. My name is Doug Stewart. I am the CEO of the Libertarian Christian Institute. You can find us at libertarianchristians.com. We've been around not as an institute, but as a website since as early as late 2008. It was founded by Dr. Norman Horn. I'll explain a little bit more of that as I go through things. But I've been the CEO for a couple of years, and I'm really in charge of making sure that we get consistent content output, and also sort of part of the strategic value to LCI in terms of like, hey, what is it that we're going to do to support those who listen to our podcast, those who read our articles, and correspond with people. And so, in terms of the book, Faith Seeking Freedom, what we learned was a lot of people have come to us and said, hey, I'm a Christian and I'm a libertarian, and I'm having trouble putting these two things together in a cohesive sort of presentation. And so there's a lot of questions that people have. It could be from anything from abortion to free market economics to socialism, social justice, immigration is a big topic, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, those kinds of things. And so what we've done is we created a book, not primarily to say, hey, you should be a libertarian because of this. There's actually a book out there for that reason. But to equip those who are Christians and libertarians to give succinct, adequate, and accurate, of course, defenses to the over 100 questions that they tend to get asked the most. Now, incidentally, when you create a book like this, this is a great introduction to people who have no idea what libertarianism is, and from a Christian perspective. So it's funny. Our primary purpose was just for our own crowds, so to speak, to equip them, because that's our goal. But it also turned out to be just this handy, hey, you know what? We've had this conversation. You're asking me things about libertarianism. Why don't you read this book? So that's sort of the genesis of the book itself. And I'll let Dick introduce himself further, because he's one of my co-authors.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So, of course, my name is Dick Clark. I'm an attorney in Lincoln, Nebraska, and sitting in Dick Clark Law right now. But I have been involved really talking about libertarian Christian ideas, I guess, for about the last 20 years. And Bob, you'd know a little something about that, because I always say you're my libertarian maker. Happened to cross you in Auburn, and had some conversations that really made a difference in how I address these issues. And I've been loud about it ever since. So I guess thanks for that. But last year, when this project was really taking on a head of steam, Norman got in touch with me, and we've talked almost daily for the last 15 years, because we're on this libertarian mailing list with Stephan Kinsella and some other libertarian ne'er-do-wells talking about libertarian theory every day. So Norman said, hey, you write about this stuff on the list all the time. What would you think about coming on board this project? And he told me about Doug and Carrie being involved. And it was just a really awesome opportunity to, again, as Doug said, put things in a form that hopefully is useful and easily digestible, both to people who are trying to crystallize their ideas as libertarians about how do I explain this issue? How do I connect it with my faith? Why is this not only acceptable as a Christian to take this view, but why ought a Christian take this view? And then for that reason, it's a great appeal to other people who are Christian believers, I think, who need to understand, hey, how is this a product of Christianity, or, something that Christianity would point me towards, rather than me having to conform my faith to this worldview, right? And so to me, that was probably the most important part of the mission, is almost a apologia for Christian libertarianism. So,
okay, great. And to reciprocate that, Dick, I think I told you this at the time, but when I first met you, when I was down at the Mises Institute, I was still an atheist at that point. And then I was looking at your website, and then I noticed like you proudly proclaimed the date that you accepted Jesus as your savior. And that kind of just filed that away. And then that, for whatever reason, when I did the same move, like I think I kind of remember that you had done that. And like, that's what made me say, you know what, I think I should actually, go on down and formally do this thing and remember the date that I did it and that kind of stuff. So anyway, that stuck out to me at the time. So,
wow, that's awesome.
Oh, that's really cool.
Why don't we, before we get into the book, just you've alluded to Norman Horn, who's one of the co-authors, so you'll know who he is. What about Carrie Baldwin? Who is she? For people who don't know.
Carrie Baldwin is the I don't know what the word is, the founder or the only person at a website called Mere Liberty, and she is a philosopher and a regular writer to the Libertarian Christian Institute. She is also starting to become well known in the libertarian world because of her debate with Walter Block at the Soho Forum in, let's see, it would have been December, right before COVID, so December 2019. Which, that was actually the only Soho debate I got to watch. And I tell you what, in person, I actually went up to watch it live, and it was so great. I got to know Walter and Carrie a little bit more by watching them interact, and it was one of the better ones that I've seen.
And so on that, Walter was defending his well-known evictionism position, and then she was, would you call it pro-life, or is that too clunky of a term?
I would let her self-identify specifically, but it's more like, it's sort of like Christians saying I'm a Jesus follower, or a libertarian saying, well, I'm really more of a free marketer or whatever. It's like, you get to nuance the terms, but yes, she is pro-life.
Okay. So in other words, she was against Walter's evictionism because it allowed for okay. Yeah. So let us mention, while we're talking about this for the listeners, even though there's the news hook of the Texas abortion controversy, and abortion is covered in this book in detail, we decided we're not going to go over that in this particular episode, which, by the way, folks, is bobmurphyshow.com/214, because Carrie had a lot to do with the content in the book. And so we just decided, why don't I try to get her on separately and just talk about,
get a whole episode just on that, and you will love it.
So we will defer. Yeah. And plus there's so much material in this book, we don't need to do that if we're going to defer that one. Okay, so let me just jump right in then, and we'll start with the big picture stuff. So I think a lot of Christians would say, I won't necessarily read these verbatim, but you can imagine a lot of Christians saying, hey, politics is dirty, and, Jesus doesn't want us to, his kingdom's not of this world, those sorts of sentiments. And so you can understand a Christian who's, it's not that I'm against libertarianism, but that's certainly not an important element of my overall, makeup. And you guys, by focusing on this so much, that's, doesn't Jesus want us to focus on the important stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does feel like a lot of people feel like they're getting dragged into politics, into the dirty arena of politics, if they have to become a libertarian. And, we do, of course, answer that question in the book. It doesn't mean you join a party. It means a certain particular set of ideas that you believe about your relationship to basically the rest of the world, and most importantly to strangers whom you have casual interaction with in the marketplace. And so, I think a lot of Christians are worried that if they get dragged into it, then that means that they're either less Christian, or it's not really central to the message of the gospel. And I would push back a little bit on that, and we do a little bit in the book, and say, well, if all you're thinking of when you hear the word politics is electoral politics and the attack ads that you see on TV or hear on the radio or on your Facebook feed or whatever, well, of course, what we're not saying, of course, you're going to have that view. But if you expand your view of what politics means in its sort of more raw, neutral form, it really is, how do you relate to other people? And everybody is political. They have a way of being in the all relates to other people in certain ways. So they might be the person who thinks that all businesses should have certain types of minimum regulations. They might hold that opinion. Well, as soon as you hold that opinion, you're already being political, even though you may or may not vote. And so the way of being in the world in our minds is that you have a thought about what your relationship is to the rest of the world.
It's not like our relation to others isn't addressed in Scripture, right? I mean, obviously, the story that's told in the Bible is central on God and his relation to us, but it matters to God how we treat other people. And it couldn't be clearer in Scripture, right? And there's all sorts of admonitions, especially if you're looking at the Old Testament and the minor prophets, for example. Again and again, there's these admonitions. Don't abuse the hireling. Don't abuse the stranger. Don't pervert justice against the widow and the orphan. So these ideas that human justice is part of our service to God, to me, it's what makes me a Christian libertarian is that I'm supposed to be not only telling people right from wrong, but being an example of it. And so I need to understand how to live my life in a way that is just towards others, because that's part of my duty to God. So it is an important part of your Christian walk to walk in a way that's upright, right? To avoid evil, to avoid causing other people to be victims, not just because we're hurting our witness with them, but because I'm commanded to do it, right? So...
And to get a little theological, I'll answer that I'll push back against that sentiment that people have a little bit further. When we declare that Jesus is Lord, implicit in that in the first century was that Caesar is not. You can't quite tell, but I'm wearing this hat that says Jesus is Lord, and underneath of it, there's Caesar sort of crossed out. And basically, when the early church said that Jesus is Lord, they weren't just saying, oh yeah, Jesus is our Savior, although they were saying that, of course. But what they are saying was a very politicized statement. It would be something like, Jesus is my president, or Jesus is my Supreme Court president and Congress. Like Jesus is my authority, not Caesar. And we all know that Caesar, in our modern day, represented by the state, wants our allegiance, wants our authority, or wants our obedience to its authority or alleged authority. And so Jesus comes along and says, no, I'm the one whom you shall have allegiance to. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so in order to say that you follow Jesus, you have to say that anything else that demands the same kinds of things that Jesus demands of you is not only suspect, but to be rejected.
Okay. So I think those are good answers, and I agree with you guys. Let me just push back to make this interview more interesting and not just a bunch of softballs.
Oh, good.
So I certainly understand it like a true Marxist. I think it's not merely that we would disagree with this person on their views of the labor theory of value or the way to increase GDP growth or something like that. But also, I think we would, for at least the typical Marxist that we know of, we would say, wow, man, like it's a shame that you can't get by in society without sitting back and just, wringing your hands and getting mad and cursing the exploitation of the proletariat. Like, can't you just relax and watch a football game or something, man? Jeez. You know what I mean? Like how the Marxists, quote, make everything political.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you get what I mean? And do you agree with it? And you think, okay, yes, what they're doing is a mistake. Or another example would be sometimes people say things like, hey, especially now that everybody's fighting so much on social media over, masks or vaccines or whatever, some people lament and say, hey, you should be able to be friends with someone and put aside your politics. And so it seems like that's, one way of looking at it, but it looked like in your guys' answer, you were like, well, no, in broadly defined, politics really isn't important. It's like, sort of like, yeah, sure, the guy down the street, he's a serial killer, but let's put that aside and go have a beer with him. Like people don't talk like that, but they would say, oh yeah, I voted for Trump, you voted for, whoever, Clinton, but let's Let's at least put that aside while we watch the kids' soccer game. So I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, it seems like in some contexts we're above the fray and it's our opponents who are really unreasonable and geez, all they think about is politics. And on the other hand, it's like, no, I'm a good person because I know not to, violate someone's rights. Whereas these people over here, they think because the majority voted for it, it's okay. And wow, what a bunch of scumbags. So
as a practical response, we've not yet been so successful at persuading people of libertarianism that we can sort of just hold up with the libertarians. So I guess from our perspective, we better be able to break bread with people in hopes that we can at least have civil conversations. Now, I'm a proselytizing Christian believer. And again, I think that this view of how we're supposed to be just in the world is part of that. But as long as we can assume good faith, right? As long as you can have a conversation with that other party and both of you believes that the other one is trying to get to the right answer, then I think that there's hope, right? And of course, the Bible is a message about hope for people who are fallen and have done broken, depraved things, being redeemed, right? And unmerited favor. And we're supposed to reflect that as Christians. So, should we be hardline on we must stand up for justice and not be mushy on it? I think we have to. Does that mean that we socially ostracize other people to the point where we can never reach them? Absolutely not, right? I mean, I think we are supposed to be helping other people not just be reconciled with us, but be reconciled with God. And this appeal to, from justice is you have to have the hope that people can be redeemed. And none of us, I don't think, came from the crib forward, carrying a copy of Man, Economy, and State or anything. And so maybe we have all gone through a conversion experience of sorts to libertarianism, although I wouldn't say it's at the same level.
We all were born with self-interest, though. I mean, isn't that why we cry out?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and there's things from lived experience that just testifies to the truth of what we're saying when we're libertarians and we talk about the justice of property rights and not hurting other people, injuring other people, and violating their rights.
Okay, so as you were explaining that, Dick, I was thinking, is maybe the resolution or one way of approaching it is to as always, follow the example of Jesus. He was uncompromising in terms of, what's right and what's wrong in his value system, let's say, but he also would associate with sinners. It's not, so in other words, and it's not that he went around huffing and puffing and like, oh my God, you people are disgusting. And I can't believe it. I would never associate with you because I'm a better person. And so really when we recoil against, again, that hypothetical Marxist, maybe it's more of a stereotype rather than a real person who can't participate in just normal everyday activities without offering commentary and being real smug. It's not so much that you have these intellectual views on things. It's more that you think you're better than people, and that's making it, making you unable to associate with them. And like you guys are saying, to maybe help them see if they really are walking around in error, you're not going to help anything by just turning up your nose at them.
Right, because that just probably gets them to dig in deeper to the error.
Okay. Doug, you want to say anything else on this one?
Yeah, I don't think we're calling everybody to be activists and certainly not jerks. When Dick and Norman and Bob, if all the four of us were to get together and have a drink, we'd all be bickering about all kinds of taxes and different things that are worth bickering about and complaining about and whatever, or even for that matter, if we got together with an actual Marxist. But we're definitely calling people to be civil with one another and be willing to break bread and all of that. So,
and libertarianism, it's not a collectivist utopian scheme where how do we get to the place where Jetson cars are zipping around, although maybe. But, and no offense to anybody who's written a book about the Jetsons world, right? But the fact is, libertarianism is a theory of justice, and it is first and foremost applicable to me and how I live my life. And so in that sense, I don't have to be an activist to care about the payload of the libertarian message, because it informs how I can be an upright person and what are the rational, natural extensions of the things that I see in God's law. How does that land in my day-to-day life? And so that is the core of it. You don't ever have to tell another person about libertarianism to be a libertarian, although I challenge you to try, but it's hard to do sometimes. But no, the first, critical priority is to me be that living sacrifice, right? And be holy and acceptable to God. And we're supposed to be salt and light too, but I'm not very good salt and light if I'm not living the principles myself, right? Then I'm a hypocrite. And so to me, that's the critical first thing is how can I be a just person?
Okay, is this a fair way of putting it then? So it sounds like you guys are saying, just like you often hear, hey, don't go to church on Sunday and you're a real Christian on Sunday, but then when you go back into the world for the work week, you're a different person, you have different values that no, you're supposed to be the same, and there's a way to live your Christian faith and ethics, in the real world. Likewise, you're saying it does have implications for your political positions. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes. And I think a lot of Christians make the mistake of delegating their conscience in certain parts of their life to other people. And they just sort of throw up their hands and say, well, I just think I heard it someplace that, killing is okay if it's in war or if the state does it or if it's in self-defense. And so therefore, I'm just not going to fool with those things. Somebody else is handling it and I'm not going to push back a whole bunch.
They outsource their values and ethics.
Right. And the problem is, it's not that we're supposed to take up arms and go stop the military from deploying on some unjust mission, but we sure ought to refrain from engaging in injustice ourselves, and we have to know what that means to follow that line. And so, yeah.
All right. Well, what about? I'm just looking at some of these questions. So the Israelites had kings, and some would argue that there was a theocracy, and so if you can try to hit both of those, so. I'm guessing what the obvious response is about the king element, but then even broadly say, okay, but still it seemed like they were fusing, their theology with political government. And so what, how does that affect what you guys are doing, your project?
Well, I'm teaching a unit in Sunday school right now on the life of David, right? And so he's the second king of the kingdom of Israel. But remember, the nation of Israel as an authority within the promised land, where it was a discrete people and they were the ones sort of, over that land. The first third of that history was without a king, right? It was a period of judges. And in Deuteronomy, the people of Israel are given warnings about some future king that they might decide to put over them, right? And they say, well, don't make it somebody who's after a bunch of wives and horses and all this sort of thing. And so, of course, what do we immediately see? I mean, right off the bat, of course, when they demand a king and they eventually get Saul, we see in 1 Samuel chapter 8 that they're condemned, right? The people of Israel are condemned as rebelling against God and rejecting his rule because he's provided for them up to this point, right? That a judge would be raised up when there was some threat, external or internal, and God would handle it. And of course, Gideon piously refused to accept a kingship after he did sort of his work as a judge in defending Israel. And so by the time we get to Saul and David, we just immediately see that these people are not consistent with the high and perhaps for a king impossible standard set in that admonition in Deuteronomy. And we do see that, David, who was a believer, right, in the living God and seeking God's will in many, many instances, nonetheless went after many wives, right? And we see the terrible trouble, the fratricide within his family that occurred because of him going after many wives and having all these little rivalries within these branches of the family. And I just think it's clear that kings could never live up to the standard. And sometimes they would be more wicked, and sometimes they would, have these moments where they were willing participants in God's plan, not being drug into God's plan. But it seemed like that was almost a miraculous intervention by God to allow that king to rely on him, right? And that was the exception and not the rule. And the great things that we see from David in there with a lot of terrible things include those moments where he makes clear David didn't do this, right? The soldiers in Israel's army didn't do this. God did this. And when people try to put the nation state in the seat, to be honored rather than God being on the throne, that is idolatry. And that is a rejection of God's rule. And so what I would tell those Christians who, especially if we're thinking about the big military, service that some churches might do to have a bunch of guys in uniform stand up, I hate to tell you, we can be thankful to God that we live in a relatively safe and free place, but church is not a place where we honor Caesar. And there's not just libertarians that believe that. I think there are people who wouldn't call themselves libertarians out there, including at least one childhood friend that I know who's a pastor now, who said this when somebody was asking, hey, are we doing a God and Country Sunday? And he said, we just don't render praise to Caesar in church. That's not what the church is about. And it's a rivalry for our faith. And if we don't recognize that, we could fall into it pretty easy. So,
okay. Do you guys add anything to this, Doug? Or
I think Dick was pretty thorough with that, so I don't really have anything to add.
Okay, I don't know that this was a specific question from the book, but let me just follow up on that.
Sure.
I can imagine some Christians saying something like, okay, look, guys, I agree. Obviously, we have to have godly men in political office and women in political office, and no one's going to be perfect, of course, just like not even King David. But you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The writings of Paul, of course, established that God is the one who's picking the political rulers, but beyond just that, shouldn't we as Christians just seek to make sure Christian people, or people at least who follow Christian precepts, are the ones that we elect in our society? Whereas, I've known some of your guys' views I've seen you when you talk more freely, and wow, it's not just that you want to get atheists and agnostics out of government. You want to get rid of a lot of these positions altogether. And what are you talking about? The Bible clearly establishes that we need to have some government. And so isn't the point just to try to make sure better people than worse people are the ones running it?
Yeah. Well, I'll start that answer, and Dick might have some more justice-oriented remarks to say about the Christians' participation in government. I would say, of course, given the world that we live in, I'd much rather have people who are ethical and trustworthy and are true followers of Jesus be in seats where they get to make decisions that affect a lot of people. Okay, with that one thing I said about be true followers of Jesus, there's a bit of me that's like, well, even as I say that, I'm wondering, like, if you're a true follower of Jesus, you'd sort of abdicate your responsibility to even make laws over other people in the first place. And so, of course, that's my inner anarchist speaking. I would say that for any individual Christian, and we do directly talk about this in the book when it comes to those who want to be maybe soldiers in the government, sign up for the military. But even just any participation in government itself, you really have to ask yourself what it is that you're getting yourself involved in. If it's a matter of, doing right by your fellow men in your congressional district or whatever, and advocating for them and for their rights, same way that like Ron Paul might be doing, but did in his political career. I would say that you're going in a direction that bends toward justice, and you're going in a direction that bends toward allowing other people to call Jesus Lord and not Caesar. When you enable Caesar to keep making demands of others, especially those who claim to follow Jesus, you're putting them in a very awkward position, if not an impossible position. So I would say working toward justice as a Christian doesn't mean we have Christian laws. It means we have laws that also take into account the fact that we don't live in a nation like Israel where we can just assume that the next person is going to follow exactly the way that we want things to go. So, it takes into account pluralism, and also the fact that, Jesus said to his followers, the Gentiles lorded over each other, and that is not what it's going to be like with you. Yeah, there's a lot going on there in my answer. Maybe Dick can sort of pinpoint some more of it.
Well, I had to save my witty comeback, and that is that it turns out there's no baby in there. It's just all bathwater. Okay. And so
nice.
we're not really throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The question for a Christian ought to be, what is the end that I'm trying to achieve? And are these means permissible, right? Shall we do evil so that good may come? God forbid. No, I can't go engage in sin in order to glorify God. God can work out his plan even in spite of my sin, but it doesn't, it's not something that I'm supposed to do as a Christian believer, to go engage in conduct that is clearly forbidden as sin. And so any Christian trying to achieve a noble purpose, right? I want to feed the poor, right? I want to protect the vulnerable, all of these things that are noble ends. The problem is analyzing, are the means, well, even are they effective, but then also, are they just? Is it something that doesn't violate the rights of others for me to go about feeding the poor this way? Because that's important too. We can't just create more victims. And so I think that sort of analysis is part of what we as libertarians try to focus on, right? And that is often an end when I'm talking to somebody who I know disagrees with me. I start out looking for the things that we both care about. And it's, most people are not just raving sociopaths. They have some noble thing they're trying to achieve. And I think they might just be a little mistaken about how to get there and what the right way to get there is. And so, that is a great place to start. And especially with other believers, right? I mean, if somebody, is a believer in Jesus Christ, I've already got the most important kind of common ground with them that there could be. Now, talking about the question of believers in government, while there's this thing called a state that exists, how should Christians interact with it? And should we try to go in there and sort of tinker on it and nibble at the margins? Now, I'm going to tell you, my demonstrated preferences are public knowledge here, right? I not only work in private practice as an attorney in this office, but I have an office over in the Nebraska Capitol where I'm an attorney for the Nebraska legislature. So I do help write legislation and amendments that, modifies pending legislation. And I sit in hearings all day long during the legislative session, hearing public comment and comment from different stakeholders about these different issues that come before the body. And I do believe that there is room to work with people to try to make laws less offensive to justice. And I think that's really where the work is reducing the size and scope of government. I'm not sure that we can ever cure our problem of statism that way, but I don't think it has to be an all or nothing endeavor, right? I can oppose rape and murder even while acknowledging that probably I'll never live in a rape and murder free world. And I can go and try to nibble at the margins of the state, even though I ultimately believe that all of these programs are problematic. But, if I can reduce the impact on even one person or one group of people, maybe there was something valuable there. And so that's what I try to do. And I do think there's a place for Christians to do that. And I'll tell you right now, I attend a Bible study with other staffers, and we talk about why what we do in the Capitol ought to be informed by our faith. And sometimes that's an evangelism exercise, but usually it's more of a discipleship exercise. And so I think there's a place for that. And of course, going back to the topic, Bob, that you sort of broached earlier, we aren't supposed to just totally segregate ourselves even from unbelievers, right? Even people that are totally opposed to Christ, we're still supposed to try to reach out to those people. And it's not up to us what happens to them, but we're supposed to be God's instruments and be a witness there. And I don't think that duty stops at the marble floor of the Capitol. So,
okay, great. Why don't we jump ahead here? So just so you guys know, I'm in section 2, Libertarian Basics. So one of the, at least in some versions or some expositions of libertarianism, one of the fundamental building blocks or starting points is to say you own yourself, the self-ownership. And yet, I like your question 16 here. It says, but doesn't 1 Corinthians 6:19 explicitly state we do not own ourselves? Doesn't God own all things? So that seems like a pretty big problem at step 1 if some libertarians say the building block, the starting point of this is you own yourself, and yet the Bible seems to clearly say you don't own yourself. And that's why, for example, a lot of Christians would say, of course, suicide is a sin. You don't have the right to kill yourself. That some libertarian might think that, but not we Christians.
Yeah.
So isn't that a pretty big conflict and not like merely a semantic issue?
This is the libertarian Christian version of who will build the roads.
Okay.
It's like one of those first questions, like, well, wait, if you believe in self-ownership, exactly what you just said, like where's the that's the objection that a lot of people say. What I go for is I think of it in terms of like my vertical relationship with God versus or humans with God and our relationship to one another. So for me to say to you, Bob, that, you know what, you don't have a right to do what you want with your human agency. God owns you. You don't own yourself. So you have to listen to what I'm doing is I'm telling you what I think God wants you to believe. Okay. And that is not up for me to tell you what God wants you to do. That is for you. That's between you and God. Now, I am certainly well informed by Christian theology, by the scriptures, and by following Jesus, understanding what that tends to look like. But for me to make that sort of claim is actually for me to say that you can't own yourself, and that's what I think a lot of people are doing. It's like, oh, well, you don't own yourself, God owns you. And the sort of the leftist version, sort of leans into like, well, society owns you because, you're not your own. You were made to be in harmony with other people. So in terms of like the relationship with God, yeah, sure, God owns everything. I don't think God is the owner in the sort of Lockean property rights sort of way. God is the creator. And so it's a little bit of a category error as well, in my mind.
Yes.
And so for us to say that God owns everything, it's not like God hasn't done any sort of delegation whatsoever, because clearly God has done so. So another awkward way of putting it is, I would say, instead of believing in self-ownership, I would say self-stewardship, right? Yeah. So like, okay, fine, God owns everything, God owns you. And so it's up to you to find out what God wants you to do with your life. But who's responsible for figuring that out? It's not me, Bob. I don't get to tell you how you should live, how you and your relationship with God should work. That is, I certainly can help you as a friend, as a comrade in liberty, as it were. But that's totally, that's up between you and God. And Dick's sort of leaning in on the screen here. He's like ready to jump in. So I'm gonna let him.
Oh no. I just was having a fond memory of a conversation that I had with Walter Block about this like 17 years ago. And I think Walter ended up agreeing with me, which is why I have such a strong memory, because it's like a thing to brag about. Walter agreed with me. But God doesn't exist in a state of scarcity, right? Like he has an infinite amount of time, an infinite amount of resources. He could have infinite duplicates of every, you know what I mean? So it's just, I like the fact that Doug called it a sort of category error, because God's just not, he doesn't exist in a realm where property rights are even really relevant, except for in a sort of an analogous or metaphorical way.
So he owns all multiverses.
Right, insofar as they may exist, which I don't know if they do or not. But the fact is, God's being master of it and then delegating authority in relation to other people through these things that we call property rights and justice and so on. That's not a challenge to God's sovereignty. It's an exercise of God's sovereignty, right? That he's the one who created that scheme, that people would be owners of things that they have, worked through the sweat of their brow to take out of the state of nature or exchanged or gifted to others, right? Like that's God's system that we ended up in after we left a state of plenty, and practical non-scarcity before the fall, right? And so that we don't have to worry about God being challenged by this idea that people should own things, because, by the way, in the inspired scriptures, we're told that, right? Thou shalt not steal implies that a person can own a thing to begin with. Otherwise, it would be a nonsensical claim that someone stole it, right?
Okay, all right, very good. So I think he would be okay if I shared this anecdote. So with Walter Block and ownership and whatnot, I actually a while ago proposed to Walter a paper topic that we would co-author. As you know, Walter's not reluctant to co-author papers with people, and I said, Walter, how do you like this idea to say premise, if the historical Genesis account were accurate, so it's a conditional. If it were true that that's where the universe came from, all the physical things, the material universe, then God would be the libertarian owner of everything. And clearly he would have the right to lay down whatever rules he wanted, because we're all like tenants in his property. And he could, could tell you can't eat pork. He could tell you can't, get tattoos. He could do whatever he wants in Deuteronomy, and that's totally fine. And people like Christopher Hitchens should stop saying he's a tyrant, because he owns everything. And per standard libertarian principles, he's the owner of the universe.
A theistic murder park.
Yeah, if you don't like his rules, then go do a different universe, right? Kind of thing. And Walter just wrote back and he said, "Let me think about this, Bob. This is pretty weird." And I thought, wow, that's kind of a milestone if I got Walter to back off of a libertarian topic because it's too weird. So
now, speaking of Walter and co-authoring things, I guess in mathematics, everybody has an Erdos number, right? How many degrees of separation you are from, Professor Erdos, did you co-author with him or with one of his co-authors, so on. And we would have a similar system in libertarianism, but your block number would never exceed 2. And so it wouldn't really be a useful descriptor. So anyway.
All right. So there's that element. And my joke too is to say that atheist libertarians really love homesteading, except when it comes to God, because they're very clear that not only is the God of the Bible a silly fairy tale and your daddy in the sky because you need an emotional crutch, morons, but he's a horrible tyrant too. And I want to say, well, wait a minute. It's, pick what, if you want to just say you don't believe in those stories and it's, like Zeus or something, okay, fine. But if the narrative happened, but it sounds like what you guys are saying is actually, you think there's a sense in which really it's kind of a not correct to say God is the owner of the universe in the sense. And so maybe as you were saying that, it was sort of challenging me and I was like, okay, I can see where you're coming from. When you say it's a category error, perhaps to talk like that, I suppose it would be analogous to someone saying, oh, you think you own that house? No, you don't, because if there's an earthquake, oops, your house gets destroyed. And so really nature owns your house and you just, are a tenant. That would be silly to talk like that and say, well, no, when we talk about ownership, we mean something specific. And the natural disasters or acts of God, if you will, happen. And that doesn't mean that, and you wouldn't say nature stole my house from me. That would also be a category error.
And part of this is a semantic issue, right? Because if we talk about owner, like who owns that car over there, we mean like, if I go to the DMV, whose name is going to be, the owner of record of that.
Okay,
vehicle,
so I just want to be clear. Ownership derives from the state, is what Dick Clark is saying.
No, we're just in the thrall of the state, as it happens in 2021 here where I'm at. But or the who's the owner of record at the Register of Deeds, or who has a bill of sale showing that they
just put it on the blockchain in Jeff Tucker world.
That's our preference, of course, is that Jeff manage all of it. But but that's a different sort of question than to say like, who is the owner of the hearts of mankind, or so, what I mean? Like, because we're not then asking like, hey, do you own that heart that's in your chest? We're really asking about a different kind of ownership, right? And so when we say that God is the sovereign of the world, well, right now, God does not have like a capital city where he's ruling and has all these bureaucrats that go out and run a bunch of departments, right? I mean, that's not the kind of rule that we're referring to. Now, depending on your eschatology, is that, a Christian worldview about what may be to come? Sure. But again, that's not what we're talking about in the here and now. And so again, it's just sort of talking past each other when we get into that argument to some extent. So,
All right, let's try it this way. And this is more just to shed light on your guys' framework. If a atheist libertarian says, I own myself, and so I can commit suicide, and a standard Christian says, no, you can't, because that would violate God's law and you don't own yourself. How do you guys weigh in on that? Would you say, yes, you do own yourself, but it's still immoral and God still has the ability to tell you it's still a sin? And so, you have the legal right. And so we humans can't use force to stop you from killing yourselves. It should be legal to commit suicide, at least maybe if you're 18 or something. But that it would still be a sin in most circumstances. Like maybe if you're about to get tortured or something, then even, standard Christian would say it's okay.
I don't know if I would tie it's a sin because God owns you. Like, because we've already kind of qualified that isn't even quite the right category, in that God created you. I might say to this person, God created you, and that has all sort of implications. It isn't about who has the right to make choices. Whether God owns you, creates you, however we want to kind of talk about this, God has given individuals the authority or the agency to make personal decisions. And that decision to commit suicide is not a sin, it isn't a sin or not a sin, simply because I can say to them, well, you don't own your body. Does that make sense?
That's not the dispositive fact. Yeah. So I would also point out that just because something is a sin doesn't mean that it's an injustice in relation to other people, right? And other people should not, and this of course is central to the whole libertarian credo, and I think is central to me as a libertarian Christian. Just because something is sinful doesn't necessarily mean that I can use violent compulsion to stop it or to modify that person's behavior. And I think the classic case that we can draw straight from the life of Jesus is the woman caught in adultery, which at the time was treated as a sort of property crime, but really that's not what they're after. This was about vengeance against a obvious and notorious sinner, I think is how that was approached by the people that were going to stone her. And Jesus did not intervene by saying, well, you own your own body, and so if you want to commit adultery, really, that's on you. He didn't deny the sinfulness of her conduct, but he just basically denied the status or the jurisdiction of the people who are going to stone her. Like you're not qualified to do this. If you've got no sin, well, come on up here and be the judge, right? And so he still told her to go and sin no more. I mean, there was still a correction as to the moral issue, but at least in that situation, it seems pretty clear that Jesus was saying that violent compulsion or execution in that case wasn't just, right? And so I would say as a libertarian Christian, there's a whole category of conduct that you can enter into that doesn't please God, right? And I think hurts your relationship with God and is going to hurt you in the long run, but it may not go so far as to be something that can justify compulsion. And so if you're violating the rights of others, and of course we as libertarians talk about things like the NAP, right, the non-aggression principle, to use as a lens to analyze these justice problems. But if it doesn't violate the NAP, well, I'll pray for you. I'll try to counsel you. There might be other peaceful interventions, but violent compulsion is reserved for aggressors, right? For people who violate the rights of others as God has established them. So,
okay. Let me jump ahead here to question 19. Libertarianism just seems like a selfish philosophy to me. And I think particularly in 2020, and I will ruffle some feathers perhaps, but my longtime listeners know this is my stance on this. It was in the year 2020 that I was, now I totally understand why a lot of people hate libertarians. And so, and there were, certain things, we were just kidding, but there was an underlying sentiment of the notion that I would have to adjust my personal lifestyle because someone else might be negatively affected like that. How dare you, sir? Forget about property. And I'm not asking you, you guys don't need to talk about coronavirus. That's fine. I don't want to mix that into this. But I'm just saying, me personally, I used to dismiss that. Oh, come on, we're talking about libertarianism is selfish. Give me a break, dude. Why don't you go read some? And I understood finally where that particular criticism was coming from in 2020, just my own observation there. But so in general, how do you say that I could understand a lot of Christians thinking, hey, maybe doctrinally or something fine, but, in practice, it seems like a lot of libertarians are doing that because they don't really care that much about other people. And this seems like a philosophy suited to them. And of course, let's bring up Ayn Rand, literally has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. It seems hard to avoid the fact that, it seems like there might be a connection between libertarianism and selfishness.
Well, I would point out, first of all, bless her heart, as a Southerner, I can say that. Ayn Rand was not a native English speaker. She was a very prodigious writer in the English language. But to me, I just wholly reject the idea that libertarian is selfish. And I would use the phrase that Doug already used earlier in the conversation of self-interestedness, right? The fact is, and actually really that's just a rational limitation, right? And Austrians understand this, that I don't know and cannot know the preferences and needs and desires of every other person on the planet, but I have all this local information about myself. And it just so happens that, the way God created us, I'm taking care of this body and running it around, and we don't have a hive mind, right? We're not created as some collective. We have individual minds and individual consciences, and we all have to individually be saved from our sin. And to recognize that is the condition of man is not selfish. I think it's just realistic that, we don't all share a connection between our neurons interpersonally, right? We have to run around as individual people. And the other part of it, some people would say selfish because the insinuation is that this is harmful to others. And of course, most libertarians, I think, would say, would agree with that Rothbard quote about the most just society. It's a happy coincidence that it's also the most prosperous one. And in fact, people are made better off when people generally are free to go and be entrepreneurs and build things and advance the division of labor and technology and all that. And today, what do we see in the world? But, a smaller real number and smaller percentage of the global population in poverty than really any other time in human history. And that is in part because of markets at work, right? I mean, almost entirely because of markets at work and people advancing the work of generations before. And so it's not anti-other to believe in individual liberty.
Yeah, I don't know why people think it's selfish to say that I don't think that I have a right to tell them what to do. Like, it's like, which is more selfish, that I don't get to tell you what to do, or that you think that you get to tell me what to do, or participate in this sort of state action that gets to tell me the parameters I have to live in. I mean, because if you think about it, the libertarian framework of justice is far more liberal than the way that the state is heading. I mean, there's more. I mean, goodness gracious, there's so many laws. I mean, we're talking right now about the Biden administration, thinking about how it is like the IRS, basically being able to monitor most of our financial transactions that are not cash or crypto, and maybe even crypto. So it's like, in what world do you want to live in, where people actually leave each other alone or I don't know. Or the one where like everybody gets to sort of what is it, the Bastiat quote, everyone plunders everyone. Like, I don't know which is more selfish, but I really don't think it's the one where I don't think I have a right over you.
All right, let me, again, just in the interest of making this more provocative, I'll push back. So let me pretend I'm the typical statist here in that. I might say, oh yeah, that's a very glib way of phrasing it, Doug, but that's not in practice what it is. Nobody's forcing you to deploy force on everybody else. So if you want to not tell other people what to do, like you don't have to vote or whatever, in practice, what the libertarians are saying is stop telling me what to do. Like, in other words, that's why it appeals to people. And, in other words, we could live in a non-libertarian society, and those of you who don't want to boss other people around, you can just stay home on election day. But there are some of us who feel like there's minimum standards of conduct, and we got to all contribute 10% to feed the poor or whatever. And so in that world, I'm not afraid to tell you what to do.
Yeah,
you can still respect your view. And if all libertarianism entailed is that you don't feel you have the authority or the competence to tell other people what to do, fine, you're free to do that yourself. In my statist world. So what would you say to that?
Well, except I'm not really. Your status world really does want me to participate and is going to force me to pay for it and participate. But my sort of glib answer is, well, I'm leading by example, right? Like, I'm the one who says that, you shouldn't do that.
Hang on, let me I just want to clarify what the hypothetical, what you just said there. Right. The status is agreeing. Yeah, I'm telling you what to do. You got to contribute money to the poor. And if you don't, it's because you're selfish. Right. But you saying, oh no, our philosophy isn't selfishness. It's not so much that we don't want to contribute or anything, or we mind people telling. It's that I don't want to impose on you. And I'm saying, yeah, you don't have to impose on me. You don't have to force me to go buy Rothbard or whatever. But you see what I mean? So you just said, oh no, I'm not. You're not free to not coerce others if you're forced to contribute. And they would say, that's not what we're talking about. Yeah, we're forcing you to fund the poor.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but it sounds like if you, the statist, are telling me that I got to pay taxes, you are forcing me. Whereas whatever world I want to live in, I'm not forcing you to do anything.
Right. And I'm saying, but you agree, it's not enough for you to just live in a world where you're not giving orders to other people. You also don't want other people giving you orders. So stop hiding behind, oh, no, it's not that we're selfish and we don't want to be bossed around. It's that we just don't feel we're qualified. And they're saying, in any world, if you don't feel qualified, you can just not give orders.
I mean, I guess I would probably sort of change that conversation based on who I'm talking about. If I'm talking to a far left female, I'd probably say, so it's okay for the majority to tell you what to do with your body with relates to abortion. I would ask her that question, and everyone's a libertarian on abortion if you're pro-choice, in the sense that oh, my body, my choice, right? Like, that's what I meant by that.
Libertarian as to some of the parties.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean I meant as in everybody is a leave me alone if they are if they're a pro-choice female. That makes sense. That's what I meant.
Or, hey, what happens in the bedroom isn't the government's business. That's a typical thing of someone they wouldn't say, hey, what happens in the, in the factory floor is not the government's business.
Yeah.
So, in civil disobedience, of course, Thoreau talks about being a part of things or, not being a part of things and hoping they'll just sort of wear smooth over time. But of course, he very famously went to jail for his refusal to pay a tax based on his objection to a particular war, and I think war generally, and his objection to slavery, right? And his family was a noted abolitionist family. And so there is that viewpoint that some people hold that, hey, if my money is taken from me and goes to fund this really awful violence, if I don't do anything to stop that, don't I have some culpability? Now, I'm not sure I agree with Thoreau that he would have had culpability, because I don't think you're ultimately responsible for what the mugger does with your wallet, right? I mean, he stole your wallet and you didn't want him to do that, and what he does with it after that, it's not your fault that you couldn't overcome the really tough, strong man that bested you in the mugging, right? So that's not the challenge for me. But in that hypothetical that you present, Bob, the problem is that, of course, it's not like the choice to, hey, you either participate or just sit back and let everybody else do all this noble stuff. It's kind of like the choice that Caesar tells the Christian, like, look, you don't have to, be submissive to my authority. You also have this choice to go to the lions, and nobody's forcing you to pick one or the other. Mm-hmm. And just, you are free to just sit there and have the lions pick you clean, right? And so it's a false choice in the sense that the alternative is, well, we're just going to make you do it anyway and pretend that that's some other alternative.
Yeah. Can I add one thing here, Bob?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I became a libertarian was about 20 years ago. I started becoming interested in social justice, and it had to do with what I believe still, in a way, that Jesus does want us to care about the poor, and that isn't just an individual mandate. That there is work that the church collective can do to further, caring for the poor and those on the margins. At some point, I started realizing that the only political or electoral political solution was really those advocated by like those on the left, like the Sojourners, Jim Wallace, Christian left kind of, and I just didn't feel right. So I felt like I needed to study economics, and it happened to be that one of your books was the first one that I actually picked up. And I don't know what would have happened if I'd picked up a different book. So maybe I wouldn't even be sitting here today if I'd picked up a different one. But it was
Paul
basically
Krugman's
like
podcast.
What's that?
I said you'd be on Paul Krugman's podcast.
Maybe. Or I'd be mocking people who listen to Contra Krugman on Facebook. But anyway, the reason I bring up that story is that I was highly interested in how could the poor be better off in society? And it seemed to me over the course of several years that the society that respects the individual rights of people who are trying to have a go and do their best to help themselves out of poverty, whether it be just the poor person in the city trying to run a business, and yet there's the treading on them by the regulatory bodies that say you need a certain license that's super expensive and all that. We all know that as libertarians is a big, barrier to entry. And so in my mind, the don't tread on me is really not a personal statement. I get a little agitated, especially over COVID. I was pretty upset with my governor for the limitations that ended up happening on my life. But I don't like writing checks to the IRS in April or May or whatever month it is extended to. But for me, it isn't really about me as a personal statement. It's more about, okay, if I cared about the poor, the kind of world that I want to live in is a libertarian world. It's not a world just that I don't get to tell other people what to do and so forth. And so that's a personal way to look at it, but don't tread on me really means don't tread on others as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the easiest comeback to some of these objections is just say, look, I'm not sitting in prison. Okay, I'm not the one who's at the very tippy tip of the government spear. Okay, it's not that, oh, woe is me, therefore change this policy so I don't have to feel so sorry for myself. I mean, there are much greater victims of these government policies and programs than me. And the fact is, that's just sort of an ad hominem attack that's often thrown at libertarians that, oh, you must either be a top hat and monocle wearing like Monopoly Man, or you're just, on so many drugs that you just don't know the right answer. Right. And they take away the possibility that maybe you just arrived at these conclusions through a good faith analysis that you conducted and you really believe these are the answers. Right. And of course, libertarians, some make that same mistake, right? And we assume bad faith about the others instead of saying, maybe they're just mistaken and I can lead them over to this correct line of thinking. But I think the comeback is, look, there's lots of people worse off than me, and the things that I'm talking about are to help them too. And the fact is, we can talk about not just the theoretical, but the real world history of a lot of these policies, right? Like I was in a discussion today about the minimum wage, because of course I'm a libertarian, right? But somebody was talking about, well, you can't even do this basic $15 an hour minimum wage. And I said, well, the origin of the minimum wage in America was expressly to prevent Black non-union workers from being able to get federal government contracts. And I mean, it was always from its origin, it was racist in intent then, and it's still racist in effect now. And you're hurting the people you're trying to help. And again, that's not an argument about ends. It's an argument about means, and not only what means are just, but does this even work to do the thing you're trying to do? But people have to be willing to engage in a good faith way to say, well, hey, I really believe that if I present you enough evidence, maybe I could change your mind, right? I'm not just trying to score points on you like a boxing match. Mm-hmm. So that's, like I say, it's a temptation for libertarians, of course, and more often for us because we're right so often, but it's a joke.
No, you're not.
Okay, good.
It's funny because it's true, Doug.
I'm watching the clock here, so I wanted to make sure we had enough time. Why don't we jump ahead to immigration?
Yeah.
So am I looking at these questions, is it correct to say that this book takes the position for open borders? Are you comfortable saying that?
I think we take the position that people and capital should be able to move freely. So of course,
as
borders,
a default.
Yeah, open borders kind of implies that there is this thing called a border, and there's a lot that's attached to that term. But yeah, that's probably the most straightforward way to answer it is, yeah, that's how most people would read it. But we're very much in favor of boundaries, but those would be property boundaries, right? The boundaries around stuff that people own, and we just don't think that having a bureaucracy centrally plan how people come into the country is like a good way to go about it, any more than we would think it's a good idea for the central planners to, schedule the bread production, right? It's just
okay, yeah. So hang on, I don't want to cut you off, but I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. I'm just saying because some of these questions have the phrase "open borders" in there. That I thought, because that's one of the things I say to Brian Kaplan is, why do you pick that needlessly provocative term when your actual position is you're for private borders?
Yeah.
And so maybe that goes hand in hand with you saying, now, practically speaking, given the world we live in, I don't want the federal government using guys with guns to police arbitrary lines in the sand.
I don't think those concepts are the same, though. A border and a boundary aren't the same. A border, we don't talk, I work in the law, and I don't specifically work in property law primarily, but we typically talk about a property boundary. And really, border is the kind of vocabulary that we use when we're talking about a government boundary, right?
Okay.
And so
all right, fair enough.
When people are talking about borders, they're talking about, hey, your sovereignty as a state stops here and somebody else picks up on the other side of that. And, to me, in the Bible, the first thing that jumps out at me is the fact that the Israelites were told again and again, hey, you can't have a double standard. You can't have a different law for the stranger than for the native born. And that's an example of one of the ways that Israel was engaging in injustice that was abhorrent to God and was causing their national judgment. This was one of the things that they were engaged in that was just a deal breaker for God to continue to bless them. And so that I have to follow that because it's just in the plain, the black letter law, as we say. But of course, you mentioned Kaplan. I mean, there's an empirical argument to be made, right? That look, it's not this big negative thing to let a bunch of people move someplace so they can all go get jobs and work really hard and have a more prosperous life than they would have in the first place, right? And in fact, it's arguable that usually that's just an arbitrage that's occurring, right? I'm taking this labor from where it's really cheap and bringing it someplace to where it's dear, and I can benefit from that move. And frankly, I think that's a good thing. And I joke around with people that maybe don't share my views of immigration. I say, look, do you really want to select for the people that are good at filling out government forms? And so I don't. I want to draw a pretty clear line in the sand. There are some libertarians that are very tempted to say, well, while we're in the thrall of the state, while we have this government entity or a bunch of entities in control, don't you want them to sort of manage it as responsibly as they can, like this sort of quasi-owner, even though we all agree they're not really the owner, right? And the problem with that is it's so nebulous, right? In part because of the calculation problem. There's no way to really rigorously analyze it. you just end up using that as an excuse for whatever your foregone conclusion was, I think. I just don't think there's a rigorous way to derive, okay, well, here's the correct immigration policy, given that we're in the thrall of the state and we need these quasi-state manager, people to continue to operate in some fashion. The fact is, it's wrong to use violence against somebody if they're not an aggressor. And the government shouldn't have any right to stop me from inviting somebody over for dinner if I want, whether they're from Mexico or from New Mexico. And that's the bottom line. And that brings up the other point as a libertarian Christian, the least of these, right? When Jesus is talking about the least of these, he's talking about, among others, the stranger at your door. And I think that we are commanded as Christians to be welcoming, and Christian hospitality is a thing. It's the fruit of the Spirit. And so if we are in a position where our government forbids us from engaging in conduct that God commands us to engage in, that's where a decision point comes. And like Daniel, who was a government official, right, one of the highest ranking government officials, piously engaged in civil disobedience, right? He went out on the balcony to pray because at this point, the law of the land conflicted with the law of God. And he said, well, I'm going to make it real clear which side I'm on. And so not all government laws are like that. Sometimes I can say, I'm going to submit to this. It's violating my rights. But like Doug said, I'm going to pay my taxes. And not just purely for fear of wrath, but to avoid the appearance of evil, right? I don't want to look like a lawbreaker because that interferes with my Christian witness. But that doesn't make the taxes right either. So,
all right. So just as a matter of historical knowledge, are you the kingdom of Israel? And maybe you need to distinguish among, well, when this guy was a king, this was the policy. But did they not really have border enforcement?
Well,
or you're saying they did, but you think that was part of what God was mad about when he said don't have different laws for foreigners versus...
So I guess I was not just strictly talking about are you admitted or is there a wall in front of you? But of course, we have different rules for people who are in the country as non-citizens about what they're allowed to do. And especially if you're not here on a green card, but you have some kind of a temporary non-immigrant visa, you can't work. There's all sorts of constraints on what you can do and where you can go that there wouldn't be on another person. And fundamentally, if you're treating somebody differently because they were born, under a different state than you were, I think that really does get to the core issue. Now, if somebody's talking about an attack, I don't think Nehemiah was doing anything wrong to rebuild the walls or whatever, because that really was fortification against aggressors, right? That's like having locks on your doors in a sense, right? And it's just that all of your neighbors come together to put the lock on the door. In that example, I don't think that's the same as borders around a nation, right? There wasn't a wall around the nation of Israel. They just had these city walls because at that level of civilization, that's the most efficient way to come together and help defend each other, right? And so I'm not sure that that's apples to apples, I guess is my response. So, of course, there's a reference in numerous passages of Scripture to not just the stranger, but the stranger sojourning among you, right? And so the idea, it really has to do with the person who has come to identify with the nation of Israel, but they're not of the nation of Israel, right? And so I do think that in Israel, it was possible to enter the territory of Israel, but you just had to, abide by the same rules as everybody else. And of course, at that time, that's going to include prohibitions on idolatry and all sorts of things that were not always perfectly enforced. But yeah, I don't think there was a strict prohibition, and we can see the evidence that there wasn't from these accounts of the sojourner among us. So.
All right, how about this one? I'm jumping ahead here. Question 97 says, aren't libertarians hedonists who just want to live however they want to?
We will not use this opportunity to talk about John Piper's Christian hedonism platform, right? So I don't think that this is just about, maximum pleasure, right? If that's the formulation of hedonism, because of course, property rights incentivize behaviors that might not be perceived as totally hedonist, right? If you're in a situation where you have no ability to save, no ability to invest, you're going to consume as fast as possible. And to me, that's more associated with hedonism. I think that markets and property rights and individual responsibility incentivize us to forego consumption today and save for tomorrow and plan for those sorts of things because I better, right? If I don't work, I'm not going to eat, to borrow the biblical verbiage.
Yeah, if people want a hedonistic world, they should adopt Keynesianism because it encourages consumption and, just pleasure for today.
Okay, well, why don't we stop the going through the book here, and let me just give you guys an opportunity for some final remarks. So what exactly is your position? Are you telling someone who's a Christian but not libertarian that, hey, I invite you to explore these ideas and you might just find them compelling? Or is it a stronger claim that, hey, I'm not trying to guilt trip you or anything, but really, if you were a consistent Christian, you would necessarily end up being libertarian, at least in the way that, Doug and Dick think about what that term means.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, we're not here to browbeat anybody into becoming a libertarian. That would be kind of, self-refuting, I suppose, in a certain way. In terms of our position, no, I think that if a Christian has clearly thought through what their political position is, it would definitely be one where they can't aggress against other people, and that actually naturally carries into corporate or institutional decisions as well. And that, of course, implies that the state does not have a right over other people, and that delegating authority from individuals to the state is very problematic. I mean, my personal wish is that we move people along in that direction. And so it doesn't mean that everybody that I'm going to have a conversation with is going to sort of become a libertarian, but they might become more libertarian in their views on immigration. If they're a conservative, maybe they'll realize, maybe borders around the country are not analogous to private, to locking my doors at night, So now I've just made them more libertarian in that direction. So I look at that as sort of small wins, in that way. Dick talks a lot about discipleship, and I think there's a sense in which you sort of carry on the like, hey, I'm going to be your mentor in politics, but there's this sense of like, hey, I just want to see you move further along, and that's kind of my spirit toward other people. And of course, I believe that that Christians should be libertarians. I don't think they're a bad Christian if they're not. Now, again, what makes them a bad Christian is probably, pretty relative in certain ways, but it also depends on what they actually advocate for. If they don't go vote for people, to enforce, onerous drug war laws or whatever, then maybe they're not actually doing anything wrong. But anyway, I'll let Dick take over here.
Yeah, so I think the real inspiration for this book was we've been libertarians long enough where we've heard a lot of the sort of same retreaded objections. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we've been libertarians long enough where we've seen people who are zealous, but maybe haven't thought it through before they had the question posed to them. Maybe we've seen some of our friends trip over that question. And so I thought being a part of a project where we can say, maybe here are some little sort of seeds of ideas how you can approach a response to that objection. I think it was first to serve fellow libertarian Christians, to give them a sort of a way to start thinking about how to respond to that question if they couldn't immediately get there themselves. But I'll tell you, I think I've given more copies of this book and talked to more people about this book who were Christian believers but not yet libertarians, because it's a way to, since it's all divided up by topics in the book, you can sort of get a feel, what is this person's issue that they like to think about the most or feel like they're the most involved in, and let's go to that conversation. And I can show them, hey, this isn't just me, one-off. This is really what a group of people believe. And so it's been a great conversation starter for that. And if nothing else, you can shame people into saying, hey, you got to take a look at my book. So it's been a lot of fun. And I don't know, I enjoyed collaborating with Doug and the others on it. And I've got to say, I was a Wikipedia editor, 12,000 edits and all this stuff. I've worked in a lot of collaborative writing things. This was the most peaceful and friendly collaboration of a substantial length work that I've ever worked on. And I just have to chalk that up to somebody else being in control and not us, and us all sort of having that baseline as believers. And it was really a neat experience and a lot of fun. So.
Yeah, I do want to add one little thing here, is that there are a lot of libertarians who get asked some of these hard questions, which is why libertarian Christian answers to tough questions. And again, not all of them are tough. Some of them are a little bit easier than others. But what ends up happening is, and again, this is obviously conducive to, sitting down drinking a beer for 4 hours, but it's more like, okay, well, and then you spend 4 hours explaining why you believe that whatever. And we're kind of like, all right, for what about the water cooler moments where you only have a quick moment to share where you are? And so this is like, we don't want people to memorize the book, although that would be kind of interesting. But we want them to adopt their own answers. But this is sort of what you can say. And one thing I didn't say earlier on is that all of these answers are around 200 to 250 words. The only ones that are not, except for a few random ones, is the chapter on abortion, which pretty much Carrie wrote. So we felt that deserved a little bit longer form, but our goal was, and originally was like 100 questions in 200 words or less, or fewer for you grammar Nazis out there. Right. So anyway, that's kind of been the goal. We had to stretch it a little bit to get thorough answers, but we didn't really exceed 250, 300 on any of these. So these are all less than a page each.
Yeah, and there's a lot of scripture references in there and pointers to further reading. And it's not the end of any of these conversations that we talk about in the book, but hopefully it's a good starting point. So.
Yeah. And what you just mentioned there, Doug, is maybe relevant to, I'll go ahead and read the blurb I gave for the book, because it's just what you said. A very useful contribution that strikes a good balance between comprehensive answers and a wide variety of issues. The questions are indeed the tough ones that would come from Christians who do not embrace libertarianism. Honest readers will appreciate the sincere attempts to meet these objections. And so, again, folks, we've been reading or discussing Faith Seeking Freedom, Libertarian Christian Answers to Tough Questions. My guests have been Doug Stewart and Dick Clark, two of the co-authors of that book. For links to where to get the book and just in general Libertarian Christian Institute resources, go to bobmurphyshow.com/214. Doug and Dick, thanks so much for your time and being with us today.
Thanks for having us, Bob.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Libertarian Christian Podcast. If you liked today's episode, we encourage you to rate us on Apple Podcasts to help expand our audience. If you want to reach out to us, email us at podcast@libertarianchristians.com. You can also reach us at LCI Official on Twitter. And of course, we are on Facebook and have an active group you are welcome to join. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Libertarian Christian Podcast is a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute, a registered 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to find out more about LCI, visit us on the web at libertarianchristians.com. The voiceovers are by Matt Bellis and Catherine Williams. As of episode 115, our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.